I'm Councillor Gerard Hargreaves, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch this meeting remotely and listen to the discussion taking place. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask all members of the committee and others in attendance to please make sure your mobiles are on silent or switched off. And I've just checked mine and it is. And I think it will be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Please join me. 72 seconds. Thank you very much. So we now move to the agenda we have in front of us, and item number 1 is apologies for absence. We have a full house, I think. No apologies. Full house, well done. Thank you very much for all being here. Item number 2, declaration of interest. Does any member have an interest to declare?
Yes, I do. I've been appointed to the PSAA board member.
I want you to say what the initials are and then everybody.
Public sector auditor appointments.
Right.
Limited.
Which we've discussed about many times here.
So that would be yes.
So item number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Due to a technical glitch, the minutes that you have in your agenda pack, your meeting pack, are not the amended minutes. So I have now the amended minutes here, so we can do one of two things. We can delay signing them till the next meeting when you've all had a chance to look at the amended minutes. It's mostly technical and little typos. Or if you're happy, I can sign these now as proper record.
You're happy with them?
I'm happy with them, yeah. And they've included menu of all your. So the committee happy with me to sign them?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I'm just going to jiggle the agenda around a little bit so Cindy can actually go first and then leave us. So we're going to do item number 6 first on the agenda, if that's okay, please, which is yeah, it is the risk management strategy, and it's page 59 in your pack. The purpose of this report is to present the draft risk management strategy for 2025 to 28 to this committee for consideration, comment and approval. So David, are you going to
briefly introduce? Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to ask Cindy Inchiachempong, who's our audit and risk manager, who's had a big hand in drafting the risk management strategy. We've also been through the executive management team, just to give you a brief introduction to the strategy itself, and we'll have to take any questions.
Thank you, David. So the risk strategy has recently been updated. It hadn't been updated for some time, so it was due a review. And we decided to take a different approach when we were drafting this risk strategy, because sometimes the documents can be heavy in the terminology, and we wanted it to be a document that everybody can use. There is an expectation if you are in senior leadership, you will understand risk management, you would know how to manage risk. However, risk filters all the way down to officer level. So it was important that, as well as getting buy-in from leadership in terms of coverage, that it was also going to be a document that we use. And it was more about strategy in terms of, you know, how we see risk management and how we see the strategy in terms of risk management. We also wanted to make sure it was aligned with RBKC's expectation, their safety first. So we went to EAT with that as well. We also had their consideration in there. The strategy document will be supported by a risk toolkit. So the strategy is about what risk management is, the terminology, whose roles and responsibilities, and then the risk toolkit. It hasn't been provided yet for reviewing, but the risk toolkit will be the how. How do we manage risk? And we'll be using real service examples. So officers, when they are looking at risk management, it will be, okay, I understand now, because like I mentioned before, sometimes terminology can throw people off and people then will be risk averse and not want to even deal with risk at all when there are actually opportunity risk as well. So by giving that understanding, we're empowering our officers in regards to risk management. We'll also be supported by e-learning as well, which will be more sort of a hands-on sort of learning in terms of risk management. And people have different learning styles, so we've taken that approach as well. The risk strategy will be reviewed on an annual basis, just to see how we are in terms of managing our risk and how we have rolled out our learning, and whether we've actually started to change the culture within the council. And then it will probably be updated probably on a 3-year basis. I'm hoping that you have some questions or comments, because as I mentioned, senior leadership, audit committee buy-in is important, because, you know, top down, if we have the right culture at the top and we filter down through the organisation, we're more likely to get people following the process and expectations.
And when will the toolkit be ready?
Over the next 2 months, then we're working on a toolkit to roll out. So once we've got approval for the strategy, we'll then developing a toolkit to roll out with training for officers, with e-learning, with workshops, and just going around the departmental management teams to talk about the strategy as well, to make sure it gets well embedded in the organisation from the top down.
I think when it's ready, one of our meetings, we'll have a demonstration of it. And,
Yes.
So any questions from the committee on the strategy paper in front of you? Tara?
It's more of a comment than a question, but thank you very much. I really like your approach that you just outlined, because I've got no problems with the strategy at all, but I do think it's all about implementation, especially at kind of, as you said, grassroots level. You know, if people, this is often the kind of officers who kind of see things, and if they are not reporting to it, as you rightly say, with the culture, then you just miss those things. Thank you very much for kind of taking that approach and kind of the workshops and the training and all that. It's really important.
Thank you.
That. Just kind of slightly linked to that, just at the end, you've got reporting. And I think, I suppose this might go with your stop whistleblowing policies as well. I didn't know whether you wanted to mention that. Where, you know, sometimes it's good that people can actually be able to kind of have alternative pathways to kind of escalate their concerns if they have any.
Yeah, so we had a whistleblowing policy, which the committee's seen before. We I think need to more explicitly build in how people raise concerns about how risk is being managed. It's
publicise it. Yes, sometimes you can have those policies, but nobody actually knows about them.
Link them all together.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, no, I thought it was a good paper, and thank you very much for it. It's good. I just had a couple of comments. On page 70, our Audit and Transparency Committee, you say elected members play a crucial role in risk governance through the Audit and Transparency Committee committee, which scrutinises risk reports.
As to all members of the committee.
I'm not an elected member.
We will amend that.
Okay, thank you. Neither's Tara, neither's Andrew, so yes. And the other thing is on page 72, we have these risk types. And the one thing I've always felt about the risk register, it actually starts off at quite sort of detailed risks. And if we could actually use these headings and group the risks under that, I think it would make it much more. Yeah.
And that's exactly part of the intention. So how do we report and aggregate risk in these categories? So actually, if the authority faces lots of risk in a particular area, how is it mitigating it, how is it learning across the organisation, how is it thinking about common controls, mitigation, so that's really helpful.
In our risk, we are currently sort of developing a risk tool. So at the moment, our risks are, on paper, essentially, I would say. So we are developing a risk tool, and we do have some of these headings. So you are able to then filter across the organisation under those headings specifically. So if you want to focus on, financial risk, you'll see all the risks across the whole council related to that. And we should be able to pull off a report specifically for that. So the risk tool should give you that.
So again, in the future, our reporting here will not just focus on the strategic risk, it's actually what we get from the aggregate of the departmental registers as well, so the kind of key risk themes and risk areas.
And how far down in the organisation would access to that tool be? I'm just thinking how we really embed this right across the organisation.
So we're working with each directorate now. Each directorate operates slightly differently. So the expectation is you've got strategic risk register, you've got a default entry register, which the executive director manages. Each of their direct reports is a director as a management team with their risk registers. And then within certain areas, there are services that go into more granular detail into that. So, for example, DD&T, which is data, digital and technology, has something like 10 sub risk registers that sit below their directorate register, their third tier register. So we're working with the organisations to understand what's appropriate for each of them to make sure they've got the right level and granularity and the right access for officers to be both reviewing but updating and seeing those risks as well.
I'm sure when you work it through it, listening to what you're saying there, it sounds quite complex. And I feel that the more complicated it is, the less people will look at it or will.
So we're looking at what the business needs. So we're not saying you must do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. That's a directorate level. We're saying, what do you need to help you manage risk?
We do also have risk champions. So for each directorate, there is a risk champion who will be supporting the directorate in terms of sort of dealing with risk, as well as myself. So I get what you mean in terms of, because we're going into so much detail, it can be quite complex, but it's actually broken down into sort of smaller chunks. So it's manageable. So for the officers who are probably managing risk on a day-to-day basis, it will be easier for them. And with the risk champions in between, that should obviously minimise any challenges, or if they are facing some difficulties, they can go to the risk champion.
So when we have a demonstration of the tool, it might be great to have a couple of risk champions here.
Yeah.
See what they do, what their role is, how they're being trained.
Can I just come in on that? So something that is across directorate. So for example, the old previous incarnation of Oracle sat at different levels and across different leadership teams. My concern is that on an individual level, people had their irritations, but it didn't necessarily get flagged as the big risk. And it was only when you pulled them all together that you suddenly had a big risk. Mm-hmm. How do we make sure that those streams all come together and they aren't all bubbling along at the bottom level? And it's only when they oil up that suddenly everybody goes, oh, that should have been on the top register.
So we are looking at like collaborative risks. So the risk tool will allow you to pick up on that. We're going to be looking into like a Power BI app. So you should be able to pick up quite quickly that, okay, this is a risk that's across all services. I think that's what you mean, yeah. So you should be able to pick that up from the Power BI tool that will be linking into our CAMS risk tool.
So we'll have the overview of the whole organisation's risk registers in one place then to be able to exactly so the council gone to pull together those common themes.
It might help to look at Oracle as an example of the toolkit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to ask about on page 72. We're talking about identifying this, and I wondered if we could say a bit about what the process is for identifying this, and what is the risk won't be identified. If that makes sense.
But I suppose there is always a risk won't be identified. But what we encourage now, and we continue to encourage through the new strategy, is actually lots of discussion at management meet teams at different levels, so that they're having conversations, not just about we have a risk register, it's all fine. Actually, what risks are they managing? Have they captured them? Will we be able to independently challenge as well to make sure that they've got the risks that sit in their areas? So we do horizon scanning, which again we're going to be talking to you as a committee more about going forward in risk reporting. We can share that with you, but also getting the service to think regularly about what risks they're facing and what new risks, emerging risks there are. Because that's the art of this, is having that conversation. So using the risk register as a basis for saying, okay, so what's new, what's changed? How do we make sure you've got it captured?
Great, thanks. And I wanted to ask also, in the table of risk types, in the vision and the statement and what have you, it does talk about being a safer, cleaner, fairer borough and in context with the council plan and learning prevention and what have you. I don't necessarily see anything here, and it may be that it's encapsulated within implicitly. I don't see anything about risks to residents.
So from my point of view, the people risks have to be more
It would
explicit,
come under that.
but also the operational service delivery risks.
Yeah.
As well, and then the statutory, the sort of governance compliance legal risks. So perhaps we need to emphasise that.
Yeah.
A bit more closely.
I think
That's
that
where
would be
they're all
good to
covered.
clarify that,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
then that ties it in with what you're saying about mission.
Yeah.
Division rather.
Indeed.
And did I have anything else? I was just wondering, I always ask this, but I was just wondering where you are referring to lessons from Grenfell. Are they effectively written somewhere? Is that something that I could
So
tell
I
you?
think what we have now, which is really helpful, and so this is going to inform our audit work, obviously, is the commitments to count, the response the council made to phase 2 in the
Yeah.
report, and the commitments it made as a result of that. So for me, that's a key sort of database, as it were, of
Yeah.
lessons learned from the Grenfell inquiry to apply to our audit work, to our risk management
Great.
work.
Yeah.
Going forward.
I mean, I think there is a danger when we talk about lessons learned in a sort of general way, we're not being explicit. So there was a report in 2019. We're not quite sure what happened to that. So there are sort of sources we can actually refer to when we're talking about that. And I think we should maybe make that more explicit.
Yeah.
From the point of view of optics for the council. That this isn't just a kind of a happy phrase that we use to justify things that we're doing. It's actually something concrete that's based on work that's been done. Thank you.
I think actually probably a year down from the inquiry report, we ought to just have a look at it as a committee and
Yes,
see,
Yes, yes.
do an audit of that
Yes,
report and
what's
see
happened.
what has actually
Yes.
happened. So the
Yes.
report just wasn't a nice report and nothing's.
Yeah.
But I think that wasn't the only learning, because I think in that report it talks about ways in which the council has changed based on learning it already had.
Yes.
So I think it encapsulates quite a lot, not just that most recent piece.
John?
Thank you. First say you talk about risk champions on page 70, but you don't actually explain it. So perhaps you could put a paragraph in about who are
Yes.
risk champions. Page 71, a substantial question. It's the third bullet point up from the bottom, the risk scoring of 16. How do you pick that number? And do you have a view on how many we should have as a risk? This is page 71. So the risk scoring of 16 or above on our risk matrix.
Yeah, so you'll recall, as when we brought the strategic register to you in the past, we've got the heat map. We use a 5x5 approach.
Yeah.
So we basically have a sort of a zigzag line that goes through the register that shows the above appetite risks, the red risks, which are
So I'm
Score 16
remembering
and above.
the 15s. That's why I'm asking if you pick 16.
so it's yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I think it's just looking at how we get something that is significant in terms of the risk score. So it's either got a very high impact or a very high likelihood, or a combination of two.
And what about volume of 16s?
So
So
you get,
we
yes,
talk
yeah.
about
Yeah.
the risk scoring, but actually do we want to look at if we've got too many 16s or 15s?
So that's a good question. So I think we do see the heat map when we're doing the strategic register, how many are in that red zone. So there are typically sort of 3 or 4 risks in there. They change over time. I think the question about whether you have too many of those is a good one. But actually, if officers assess the risk with that level, that's something we need to perhaps question whether the kind of overarching management controls and framework are sufficient. Because if there's a lot of high risk, why is that the case? So as an organisation, you expect to have a relatively small proportion of red risks compared to your total risk register. But
So we're either measuring it wrongly or
it's
we're
a
not
challenge.
managing it
Exactly,
properly. Yes,
yes.
yes.
So I think it might be helpful to talk about
Yeah.
if there's a cumulative or a sort of, it's not that there is a tipping point, but actually if there are too many stuff. And then that then led me on to the opportunity risk, which is the next paragraph, which is how does that link to the risk appetite? Because you're actually encouraging people to take some element of
Yes.
risk. But I
So-
Risk.
Yeah, so in the last bulletin on that list on page 71, the risk appetite, we talk about how we want to encourage managed risk taking, to particularly where it drives service improvements as for benefits of residents. So actually, we look at ways in which we perhaps have less bureaucratic or less overly controlled systems that actually have the same result with the same safeguards, or where we try to innovate and do something new. So use of new technology might be a good example of that, where we might be looking at use of AI in some of the service provision, for example. So it's that managed risk taking where you look at opportunities to have the same or better control with less overhead, but actually get better benefit, better outcome for residents, or savings, or whatever the objective is in that particular area.
Just to add to that as well, I feel like with, you know, the direction we're trying to go with risk management anyway, I feel like once the culture changes and once people know how to manage risk, opportunity risk will be beneficial. We're trying to be the best council. And in order to do that, you need to be innovative. You need to be able to say, okay, what can we do to continually improve? If people always see risk as, okay, it's a threat, we have to avoid, we'll always stay in the same position. So it's the reason why it's there. And obviously you mentioned some of the things which we'll be looking at in terms of looking at opportunity risk. But yeah, I believe once the culture changes and we are able to empower our staff, I feel like opportunity risk will be managed at a good level. And it will fall in line with our risk appetite as well.
So does somebody looking at opportunity risk, do they need to look back at the bullet points in risk appetite? Does it need to be linked back in? As in, I recognise that you're trying to get people to step outside their comfort zone with managed risk. But at the moment, I kind of read that as a standalone opportunity risk, which was almost encouraging a little bit more. But I kind of wondered, should you be linking them back to looking at the risk appetite?
So I think the context is all of those together rather than seeing it as just a standalone.
Yeah.
So you can look at things like, you know, safeguarding, having some trouble safeguarding. You want to have a low tolerance of. If you're looking at opportunity risk, for example, if you're looking at investment in property, for example, to deliver a service in a different way, that could be something where you wouldn't be transgressing, as it were, on those earlier bullets in the list. You'd be having an opportunity to actually do something beneficial by taking a different approach.
So I don't get out of jail card free if I just...
No, you can't. I just did that one. I ignored it. That's where managed risk taking perhaps is a code for within this framework of this risk appetite as a whole. Yeah.
So I think your comment about culture change, I'm really interested to have a couple of directors here or something, how they're doing that.
Yeah,
Because
it's really
it's a nice phrase, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what is it? How do we know when the culture's changed? Are we taking 10 risks?
Yeah.
We're only taking 4 last time, or I don't know how we measure that or gauge it even. I don't know. Sydney, you were wanting to.
Thank you. So I've just got 3 quick things. Thank you for the report. First one is on page 67 when we talk about our activity in the paragraph. In order to find and demonstrate some change, what sort of 2 implied questions. The first one is there a standard framework for risk metrics from the governing institute so that we can have a table of comparison showing what should be in a risk report or what should be in your risks that you're looking at and what we're doing by this one, so I can actually look and compare what a standard risk register, standard risk strategy should look like and where we're different, make sure that we are better and more improved in that. So that would be the first question. And then the second question is, as we've heard about Grenfell, that we're trying to be the best council. Is there a way for us to look at what our strategy and risk registers were doing at the time when decisions were being made in relation to Grenfell, and how they would have been different given this current strategy? Because that is hard data where things in the public domain have gone wrong.
Yeah.
And I would want to see, this is what we did when Grenfell happened in 2016 in relation to approving cladding. And these are the processes that we'll now have if we were going to approve the cladding, and how they're completely different to what we did then to what we'd be doing now, to give me some confidence that the strategy would actually have some meat on the bone and would actually be able to deliver change to residents in the borough. Because if the word proactively is written here, in the normal understanding of proactive, someone has to say, oh, look, there's a problem there. We need to red flag that, tackle it, deal with it, and get on with it. And there should be processes in place to do that. So yes, you've been quite high level with the strategy, but those would be my first two questions.
Okay, so I'm happy to pick up the first thing now to bring them as well. Yep. So there isn't in the same way there is a professional body for auditors, the Institute of Internal Auditors. There isn't one body that sort of oversees and regulates risk management. So there are different bodies like the Association of Local Authority Risk Managers and others that are around that give guidance. I'm not aware, we will double check. There isn't a standard sort of assessment matrix or metrics about what risk management should look like and what a risk register should look like, but we'll come back to that. We have looked before across anything there. What we do is look at look out for good practice across the sector, which is something we've done to put together the risk strategy here. So that's something we'll take away and go and come back on. Happy to do that. In terms of the being the best council learning from Grenfell, so having joined the week after the Grenfell tragedy happened, I'm aware of the changes that have been made post fire. But I do know that pre-fire there was a corporate risk register that existed that appeared to go to the senior management team, appeared to be an aggregation of departmental risks rather than thinking about what the corporate cross-cutting risks of the organisation were, which I've described as committee.
You should have both top down and bottom up.
Yes, so, and I think to me that from a visibility point of view, that seemed to be where risk management sat.
Yeah.
So when the previous chief executive, Barry Quirk, came in 2017, by 2018, we put in place a much more resident-focused approach to risk management. So the strategic register, which is the thing you've seen evolve over the last 6 years, was something that he instituted, that the executive management team's risk and control board reviewed every 2 months in a much more sort of analytical and forensic way, but also used it to flush out new and emerging risks, which again wasn't happening before. So again, you've got that. I think that change over time has been quite a journey, but this is where we think now the strategy will help us take the next step. So we think we've got quite good embedding at the director level and at their management teams. This is how we now percolate that further down the organisation to make sure we've got risks truly coming from bottom up. And I think now we've got Cindy in place to resource.
Is it possible at all to do a before and after, just a chart of
Yes, that'd be good. Yeah. Yes.
before and after?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cindy, do you want to comment on that?
I'm literally going to say what you're saying now in terms of risk is now being managed. We're trying to get it all the way down to officer level, those who are on the ground, and have the risk picked up from there and filtered up rather than it just being corporate strategic risk. So I keep referring back to culture, but it's literally the culture change and everyone's responsible and sort of taking a bit more ownership. So I have seen I've been here a long time as well, so I have seen the changes that have happened since I've started through Grenfell, and things are happening, but I think we're just trying to get more officers involved in the process as well, and that culture change will
What would help us are some really specific culture change is a nice phrase, isn't it? And I'm not saying it's not happening, but to help us understand it, some concrete.
So even now, some of the work we're doing now. Oh, you don't want to know the answer?
Well,
Yeah.
if you could do as a before and
After,
after.
And what we're trying to get to in the strategy.
Yeah.
Just finish off.
You said 3 questions. You've got a third one. Go.
So the final one just comes on to a point I think David made about there are 3 levels of risk, and if you pick DD&T, for example, where they've got sort of 10 risks at the
10 registers.
If somebody on there is an officer and sees there's a cyber risk issue, and council then gets hit by a cyber attack because there was an issue on that level that hadn't been escalated up, does this strategy capture and take up things that are not on those top levels for the EMT? Because there are plenty of councils that have been shut down with cyber risks, for example. And I would feel uncomfortable if there was something that was occurring on a lower level risk register that for some reason wasn't on the more important ones because it hadn't actually filtered out them. And there are plenty of large organisations, obviously, when I was in the army being one of them. If I saw something on the ground, it got to the general very quickly. And that was our culture in the army. And I haven't had, or I'd like to get some assurance that Now, with this register, with this strategy, you're empowering people to do it over and above what you're calling whistleblowing, which is a totally different thing.
Just different thing. So I can show you. So giving DD&T as an example, so those 10 risk registers at the service analysts around the information management and information governance, information security team, and they feed into that departmental register, which is reviewed every month. Then the exec director will refer that to executive management team. So I've seen examples where issues around cybersecurity have come up surface quite quickly from that bottom level through to EMT. Those discussions. So we have say risk and control board every 2 months, executive management team level, and there are regular papers around cybersecurity as an example. So I think it does work quite well. I think there's always more we can do to improve, but there is that expectation of raising through the management chain, raising through the risk registers, so that quickly something like that needs to be tackled urgently is being done. Yeah. Again, perhaps if we can give more examples of that when we do the risk reporting, maybe in the future, that's absolutely going to be helpful.
John.
Very quick one, just talk about the score, the sort of 16 risk appetite. The other thing one should remember is there are going to be some things that have a very low likelihood, but they're very devastating if they happen.
Yes.
So then you might have a kind of score of 5 because it would be 5 times 1. And so we just need to make sure that if there are some things like that, we don't say, oh, they're below 16, it's fine.
No. So we're not saying we don't look at, but it's how do we focus and make sure we've got efforts, best targets than those higher risks. Right, we should be reviewing all of the risks, particularly those, as you say, that have
devastating
impact. That's something we should make sure we've got covered.
I'd just ask about the management of risk. So I used to do risk registers before, and too often you'd see when you give somebody the how do you mitigate it box to fill in, they'd come back with all monitoring, checking, looking at it, and looking. And actually, sometimes that just was the same response all the way down. How do we actually look at those being effective and the appropriate thing, as opposed to just sentences?
I'd probably just say one word: audit.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, part of our cover audit as well, we would look at sort of risk and control, and we will test that regularly, but or challenge that. And we would encourage, officers to also maybe do their own challenging and testing that is effective as well. But I would like to say our audit team would probably cover that, and then, like I said, they should probably do some of their own checking and challenging themselves.
And will the toolkit provide
Yes.
that level of detail?
And it will build on. Sorry. I was going to say we'll build on. So you'll recall the last couple of times we brought the strategic risk register here. We've changed the focus. There's a lot more emphasis on proposed actions and what's happening with them. So we want to make sure that that's a way of executive management team and directors reviewing the actions to make sure they're effective and doing something different to them, and then reporting on what impact those actions have had. So there will be some that are ongoing monitoring type controls, but there will be others we'd expect to see. And again, we challenge that if they're not there, that will have some beneficial impact in reducing all these maintaining limits. I think it's got that focus which we need to stay. Sorry.
Did you have something, Liz? Or
well, I was just going to say that I keep on reiterating it. I think it's very important. The risk register is cross refers to the work of internal audit, so you can see how these things are being checked.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've just had a couple of just very quick points to add in closing, but I wanted to follow on from what Sydney was saying about pre-Grenfell and now. And this paper talks about improving accountability. So presumably that's identifying that accountability, there was improvement to be made in the past. And it might be interesting to know a little bit about that and how that's different now. In terms of the culture and making sure that things feed down in terms of embedding the risk awareness, I wanted to make sure that that's also going up to leadership, because that's a quite important level of decision making, which also needs to be risk aware and also needs to be making informed decisions and taking calculated risks. Just quickly, I wanted to mention, I don't know if Joanna's question covered this, but I was thinking about interacting risks. So you might have a risk which by itself is not a very severe impact, and maybe more or less likely that when we have a severe event, as we have had, what we see is multiple smaller risks which by themselves might not have been fatal, but collectively cause a complete system failure. And I wonder if you've got on the risk register small items like that, have we got a way of making sure that we are looking at risks in isolation, but also collective how they interact? Yeah.
So if I come to that point first, so the new risk tool that's in mentioned is going to give us much more ability to be able to do that, both corporately, you know, our service, but also for risk champions doing that. A director, I think it's really important point is actually about when you put to, you know, individual risks by themselves don't appear to be particularly significant, but actually if they all come together with a serious significant event, actually that can be, you know, can be quite very challenging. So that's something we'll be able to use a new tool to do more effectively. In terms, I meant to mention earlier, in terms of leadership team, we are now taking the risk register to JL joint leadership team every 6 months. So they've taken an interest in that, in what the strategic risk register looks like, and to have be able to question and challenge exec directors on that. So again, same as you'll have the opportunity here at audit committee. So I think that's a good development in the last 18 months that we've brought about as well.
So as a council, that risk aware culture needs to come from the top as well as directors.
Absolutely. I also spoke last week with a chat with Mary Wheel, who's chair of the audit oversee over the screening committee, and just to see what the individual select committees do in terms of the risk register relating to their own area of scrutiny, and what does the overview and scrutiny committee do in relation to its role. So we're going to meet with the chief exec and just look at how you're putting a lot of effort into this. You're making it much more of an issue. We've got a great strategy here. I'm just looking at how we up our game in the same way that officers are upping their game. And therefore, Cindy, what more do you want from us as you are doing more as officers? What more do you want from us as a committee? You might want to go and think about that. Because I'm conscious that I'm conscious that the officers are putting often at our request are putting a lot of energy into this, and we need to.
So I think we'll take that way. But I think for me, some of the key points are actually putting you're looking at it in a challenging, constructive way. You're doing it is a really good start. Getting exec directors and lead members here is another good step that you want to do. Actually, then think about referring matters on to overview scrutiny or leadership team or elsewhere where you have concerns about the way in which those risks have been managed. It'd be something that would be helpful to us to reinforce that profile, that culture in the organisation.
But the visibility element that we picked up from our last, when we had our session, being visible with risk management as well, I think will be very important. Knowing that actually, you know, you will be attending the audit committee to have a conversation around the risk. I think that's.
And the risk champions, again, would be great to, as I said, to similar them. But I hope, I don't know how they're going to be appointed or who they are, but I hope it doesn't happen like a lot of these things are. Someone becomes a risk champion, but they're not dropping part of what they already do to give them time to become a risk champion. So it's just bolted on the edge without actually being a key message.
So we are working with colleagues in the different directorates who are doing some of this already. So we're not. So there's a bit of
if they're doing it already, then they're not doing it
effectively. It's how effectively. So so get working with them to join.
Just going back to your point about what can scrutiny committees do. If you just follow that through, the level of the risk register that's been adjusted during the time that we've seen it in front of us as a committee and since Maxine started, has become bigger, higher issues and probably simpler. But I believe underneath within each directorate, there's so much more complexity. And actually it's that complexity that potentially should go, you either should have the executive director here per portfolio in each meeting, you know, as in what they rotate through the year, or that your individual scrutiny committees. Certainly that's not been something that we've looked at.
No, I think it would be good if individual scrutiny members collectively were also part of the awareness raising of risk generally, because then whatever we're looking at it also through that lens.
maybe we need a briefing evening for all people who are involved in scrutiny or.
Joint meetings.
Okay,
One fund.
go quickly. Yeah.
And it was to do with risk champions. So, did the risk champions have a meeting with David, you as a group on a say quarterly basis to talk about grassroots risks? Because a lot of what we're talking about here, if you go to page 70, you've got risk champions and managers and project leaders and team members. It all goes up the chain of command, and sometimes you lose detail when it gets put into a report and given to somebody else. A lot of the time, the risk champion is the person dealing with it on the ground. You say the officer that's empowered. And if the risk champions from all the different departments are always meeting, they themselves be able to identify a cross-council issue that, exactly as Liz said, or I think Tara said, if it's a one risk, but it's actually only a 5, so it's less than 16, but they understand it's a really big problem, hasn't gone up as far as they're concerned. That cross-culture communication is extremely important. They don't need to come and sit here and talk to us, but if they sit and talk to you, then you're going to get the champions for 40 minutes every 2 months, sitting and telling you these are the big things that are keeping them asleep, awake at night. And that may be different to what then gets percolated up to the director level, which then does come to us.
Or they may be seeing it in a different way. Or senior.
And I ask as a suggestion for improvement whether the risk champions should be meeting.
They will be. So we're in the process of putting that together. So we're going to get them together both to do that in terms of triangulating and considering risks that are common across departments, but also how we use them to help us to develop and evolve the risk management frame, the toolkit, and actually embed the culture. So it's not just about sort of doing, but using their expertise and their view from the directorates as well, about how we shape and evolve this over time. But absolutely critical that we get them together for those conversations. Councillor Yankson, you talked about there, how we join the dots up, as it were, and then when we go to executive management team and the audit committee, we're able to use the work that's been done with the risk champions as well to inform how we make sure that it's being embedded properly.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to call it a go on that for today. Obviously, it's an ongoing thing. Cindy, thank you very much for being here and producing this strategy. Does the committee approve it?
Yep.
That is approved, and thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, everyone. Glad to see you evening.
So we now go to item number 4 on the agenda, which is internal audit strategy. So, the Institute of Internal Auditors published new global internal audit standards in January 2024. In December 2024, the Internal Audit Standard Advisory Board, that's a big business card, the Internal Audit Standard Advisory Board and the Cardiff Institute of Public Finance Accountants, another big business card, published guidance on implementing these new standards. So new standards have come in, the 2 regulators already done them. So do you want now then, please, who's going to lead us on this? Why are you going to lead us on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I won't bore you with all that again, but you may recall that David brought a paper to the committee in December, which explained about the standards and what that was about. But the standards are, as they say, global, and the purpose of them are to improve the professional practice of internal auditing across the world. Inevitably in the public sector, we are different slightly from a lot of commercial organisations. So that's why the SIP bit comes in, and an application note was published quite late in December, which tells us how to apply standards in certain places so that we can demonstrate that we are complying with the standards which are shown in practice. One of the standards is the requirement to have an internal audit strategy and an internal audit charter, and that should clearly state what our mandate is. We did have these before under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards 2017. Lots of change, lots of development, and that's why we've now completely redone them. They are very much about how we are going to deliver the service to the council. It's very important that we identify what our vision is, what our priorities are, and how are we going to deliver that high quality audit service to yourselves. So the strategy is that how we're going to deliver that service, and with some very sort of key measurable indicators in there, which are really there for you to be able to come back to us and say, so how are you doing on this? You know, what's the problem here? What isn't this got to where it should be? Well, hopefully it won't be that. It'll be, that's great, you're on target. So I think it's a lot clearer for you to be able to see what we're doing and why we're doing it and why we present information in a particular way. You know already that we do work that could be assurance, it could be advisory. We go on to the plan, so we've got other things that we've, other forms of assurance that we bring into our opinions. But this strategy, we hope, shows to you quite clearly how we will deliver the service and how we will comply with the standards, which, you know, the key things: professionalism, integrity, transparency, and that's the key point of it. So it's quite detailed, and hopefully you can see that from there. As far as the charter and mandate is concerned, we have had a charter for a long time. It was quite vague. The key things about the charter is it contains roles and responsibilities. So there's a bit in there about the committee's role, our role. So I believe when you had a pre-meet, the point was made, it just talks about the audit committee. But the standards talk about the board. And the interpretation of the board is an audit committee. You didn't want to get too specific about the name of the committee, but it's the audit committee. It's like the chief audit executive. It's a term they use. We don't use it ever, apart from when we're trying to demonstrate compliance with the standards. So yeah, the key things are the roles and responsibilities, demonstrating our independence, showing how we can prove our work is quality assured and we can demonstrate continuous improvement. Being clear about reporting lines, independence is very, very important. And the close link between what we do, we just talked about risk, and obviously the fraud work that Andy does well. So the strategy is there for really just for information for you to review and by all means speak back into. But because we've made quite a lot of changes to the charter, it's expected that we will bring that to you, discuss it with you, and get your approval to the charter.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much for this. Reading it, one thing really struck me, and that's this difference between the audits that you do and this whole bit on paragraph top of page 24 about developing competency evolving challenges, what's happening in the whole future. And I did notice on the table that area was a lot of Levy technology enhanced division, for example, so it's not applicable. So we hear a lot from you about the audits and what you do on the audits. I haven't heard a lot of or picked up your future scoping on all of that. So either that's a new piece of work that you're going to have to staff up to, or we've just not been hearing about it.
I'll be honest with you, the past way of doing audit, it's been like it for a number of years. You have your annual plan. We've been quite progressive in moving away from that. But one of the key things that we've needed to do here is build our team and get the skills in. We've trained up apprentices. We've had, I think, the largest number of apprentices in any council department to get them totally trained up and understanding audit, so that we can. I think people who work in the organisation understand the organisation a lot better, and it gives us this opportunity to be able to be more proactive and responsive. Whereas when we buy in services, which we did buy in a lot of services, it's quite hard to change their trajectory once they've been told that's the audit you'll be doing. You know, they're going to be doing it in June, and that's how many days they're going to spend on it, and that's the person they're going to speak to. I think we're going to be a lot more able to respond to change and risk, and particularly now the team leader, the manager, internal audit risk totally embedded. But so it's a journey. We're moving along it. We're ahead of some, but we have got a lot of work to do. I agree. But to get everyone to understand that this is where we need to be. We need to use technology. a lot better to be able to give us assurances in areas which we just cannot possibly do justice to, because there's just such a lot of data. There's lots of areas where we can get assurances and we can work with departments to be able to do it themselves as well, to provide us with information. Well, we go for the outliers, you know, lots of strange things that's happening here. Again, much more closer work with Andy's team, in the fraud team, because we all have a need. Data is there, and we all need to use it better.
Okay.
So I think, if I may, Chair, for me, that what this does is we've been ambitious here to look at how we create, you know, the best audit team we can for the council, being the best council. So we're building that internal capacity. It's how we build that capability now. So how we use this to train develop staff to set performance objectives around the objectives of the plan. Use them to use this tool to hold us to account. So as we come back and report to you on how we're living the strategy, how we're doing against these objectives we're setting here. I think it's, you know, it's right that we're positioning ourselves to be ambitious on that. It's something we want you to hold us to account to.
Good. Okay. Joanna, you're giving way to Liz. Liz.
I go first. Right, okay. No, thank you very much, Liz. I think it was very helpful. I suppose the queries that I had, I just questioned on page 22 whether or not we're doing too much, you know, when we do advisory work, you know, is this too akin to management? Is it going to impact our independence and impartiality? I have a concern about that. And the same for embedding a culture of risk awareness and operational excellence. And on page 25, departments receive guidance and training on embedding risk management practice. I just have a concern we're getting too much into management and you should be independent of management. And the other query, the other point I had is when you refer to the application note, you always say that it's been prepared by the IASAB. It's actually, if you look at it, it says this has been prepared by the relevant internal audit standard setters.
Which is IASAB. Yeah.
Well, no, because if you look at the thing, it was to support the development. The UK public sector IASAB was created, and it includes representation from each of the RIASS audit committees, internal audit practice. Am I going over the top?
No, they do well. Carry on.
They wrote the application note that they said we were following. Yes.
So the IASAB's role is to develop material to support UK public sector internal audit, to consult on that material, and based on that consultation to advise the RIASS on the standards to be used. And that actually comes from the
Yeah, I get that, but in practice, the IASAB published a draft consultation on the application.
Yeah, they did a consultation.
Yeah.
But if you look at the actual application guidance, it says it's produced by the.
Do we need to? You're more technical than I am. Do we need to put some? Does anything need to be amended in this?
Yes, I think so. I think
You
it needs to be
can take
left to
that
the RIASS.
On the more substantive points.
Yeah.
So.
Liz, I thought you were very technical. Thank you very much.
On your very helpful, more substantive points. So you're right. We need to demonstrate to you that the mix of work we do is appropriate to give a robust assurance opinion.
Yeah.
So we're balancing the ask and the standards to be a trusted and innovative assurance provider. So there's an arm to advise support to management to help them with their objectives, but it does need to be embedded in assurance work. So the way in which we approach that, we need to go with the plans, demonstrate to you where we do non-assurance work.
Yeah.
But to what extent that takes up our resource, but how it contributes to our overall assurance work. Because ultimately what we do typically with advisory work, we then follow up and do the assurance work later. So it's something we use as a base to understand, help the organisation find the right solution, their solution, not ours. It's our independence. We then go back later to give assurance. So I think it's important that we're able to demonstrate to you the mix of work we've done is appropriate to the advisory and assurance and how that contributes to the whole. It's a really good
assurance bit. Yeah, even though you've advised them, you might still say, well, you haven't properly followed our advice, or you
and we go back and follow up. So any advisory work we do, we make recommendations and we follow them up. So again, we report those here as well. So, but then we do a follow up when it's say, for example, a new system implementation. if we're a constructive or critical friend on the programme, we then go back later and do the assurance work to ensure that the controls that are being designed are effective and invested.
And I think just we would need to feel comfortable as you get more involved in advisory stuff. Actually, there is a wall, if you like, between the advisory and the actual audit.
Was the case.
And I guess we need a bit more reassurance of that.
Yes, I know.
Joanna.
Thank you. Page 24, the driving continuous improvement, sorry. I looked at this and thought, should we be seeking to do this challenge to actually decrease the number of high risks or the lessons learned, or more prompt or regular reviews of follow-ups? I kind of looked at that and thought, we get the audit reports, and sometimes we get highly frustrated that things are left hanging by department.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether actually that driving continuous improvement should actually be us as internal audit challenging whether we can actually get the responses through more quickly or follow-ups. And I thought we should expressly say that.
Better engagement, indeed.
The final sentence on that page doesn't seem to run. It's so it needs some tinkering with things. And then if I could just go to the mandate. Page 33, 8.5. I'm assuming, and I thought it might be useful to say that if there was a change, that somebody is required to make a declaration in a mid-year or do it rather than just annually at the end of the year. But I think it would be helpful to actually say that. And then top of page 34, 8.7. I assume the 12 months was from cessation. But again, I think that's a draft and point for you to look at. The reported to the audit and staff will not be involved in the audit of that area for at least 12 months. So it's when does the 12-month clock start ticking? So is it from cessation? And then my last and probably more substantive point is 7.6 on page 35. When you talk about the risk will be escalated as needed, is that strong enough? So should there be a time or to an appropriate level? Yeah, it's the as needed. Who's deciding? And as needed sounds like maybe yes, correct.
Yeah, take it away.
A couple of quick ones. I'll start with my least substantive ones first. Page 27, for example, the governance and accountability, it talks about the audit committee, but I think you're talking about the audit and transparency committee. That was unclear. So all the way through page 31, 5. It's this audit committee. So are you saying it's an internal audit committee or is it us?
No, so this is our charter mandate and strategy, and it applies to all the work that we do.
Okay.
So the committee could be called many different things depending on which council we're working for, and it's just the audit committee. You are the audit committee. You happen to be called the audit transparency committee here, but I wouldn't normally expect to change that in there. I would normally reflect that on that in the plan, which is very specific to you.
Is this going to be the same across?
It should be, yes, because we deliver the same service.
How we apply the service, But we need to think perhaps just to tweak this.
Well,
Or just a definition that
It's
says
audit
committee needs audit.
as per.
which is fine.
We are the committee that does the audit,
You are.
and that's what I think they're getting.
That's right.
Yeah,
From
yes.
Sarah's point of view, you are the committee.
it's a function
Yes.
rather than a name.
Yes,
but-
sorry,
It wasn't clear to me whether that
Yeah.
meant us or something
Oh,
that
no,
you
no.
do as officers internally called the
Yeah.
audit committee, because you're the internal audit, so it wasn't clear, so I wanted as my most pedantic point first. And then, as a number of people have mentioned, it seems as if we have sort of two functions. We have sort of a management consultancy role, where we sort of a critical friend, I think the phrase you use, and then we have the phrase that I used a couple of years ago, this sort of FBI role, where you come in sort of at 3 o'clock in the morning and have a look at an area. It wasn't clear to me in the strategy what percentage of those two separate distinct roles you perform, if you perform them, because I'm going back now to probably Grenfell. If we're going to try and be the best council, and there are problems, because there will always be problems because there are humans involved, how can we get assurance that the internal audit is keeping people honest, keeping people's feet to the fire, and is actually proactively, which is another word used, finding issues that then need to be reported to us, which may not appear in anything in other documents, because it wasn't clear to me in this strategy what percentage we're a critical friend and what percentage we're people's FBI role where we actually find problems and challenges and then flag them. Because if we're going to be internal audit as distinct to just audit, we've got to have an element of that, because that's what best counsel will expect. And that's what people.
I think you're right. So I think for me, actually, advisory work does not mean we don't challenge people. We're not the FBI in terms of asking the pointed questions and actually holding people to account. So that part of our independence is actually being clear about where there are lines where people need to be managing risk appropriately.
That's the advisory sound.
It used to be called consultancy.
Yeah, it's another phrase that's.
I would suggest we never do.
We never do consultancy. So I would say that the split's pretty roughly is like 70% assurance, 30% advisory broadly. But so a lot of what I do, I don't go out doing audits, which you're surprised to. You'd be very pleased to. But I do a lot of my work is around that critical friend advisory role. So actually the way in which we use our resources is skewed as well. So that actually people like myself, particularly Moira, will do more of that type of work, whereas the team will be doing the assurance work most of the time, predominantly. So we again happy to sort of look at how we show to you how that mix works, but I wouldn't say because we're doing something that's advisory that we don't apply the same rigor and the same challenge that we'd apply to the assurance work. We do. That's important.
You do say in 8.4 that you have responsibility for fraud and insurance.
Yeah.
And independence is maintained by ensuring that internal audit reviews of these functions are carried out and supervised independently. So you're not saying that in relation to any of the other services that you're
so
doing?
the same, I think the same applies to procurement and what we discussed before. So any auditor for any of my operational areas, it would be overseen by Lisa, the Director of Financial Management. So she would be involved. She'll be involved in the scoping. She'll be involved in the insurance. Lisa Taylor, who's the Director of Financial Management.
Okay, right, yeah.
So she's another qualified accountant.
Yeah.
So she obviously therefore she knows about internal audits and how internal audit works. So she would take over responsibility for the scoping of a piece of work, overseeing the delivery, reviewing the draft reports, and then making sure that I and my team are actually responding to the recommendations and reports appropriately. So that's the way in which that independence is maintained. If it's about insurance, about fraud, it's about the oversight of risk management, it's about procurement, the areas that I cover. So that's how we would, in the charter, build independence in. So when those reports are done, Lisa will be here to be able to tell you about those and how she'd overseen them.
So would that apply to anything that you've been in an advisory role on?
No, so again, what would happen there is there would be that separation. So if, for example, Moira or I were involved in advising on a project program, another member of the team would oversee the work that was done when we did the assurance later on. So we wouldn't go and do the work, they would.
I think what's coming through here is a lack of clarity in our mind, if it is in your, maybe your mind. Is this boundaries between advisory and assurance and the lack of independence? And so I think I'm sensing, and don't need to get it tonight, that we need a bit more reassurance.
That's fine.
Of that.
Yeah.
So I was just going to finish off by saying 5.5, which obviously doesn't exist on page 32. At the moment, this is the roles and responsibilities. There's nothing there that defines what the officer's roles are. There is no 5.5.
Yeah.
Where the officer's roles should be the next people down under the 151 who are doing the work, because it doesn't tell me, as you've just given us a percentage there, 70% doing joint, 30% doing advisory. I would have expected to have seen, and that's why I'm asking the question, the officer's role is therefore to do X, which is the assurance work. The senior officers within the team is to do the advisory work. And then, as you just described, there is an independence and a separation where different officers do different things that have been involved in the role. And that would explain certainly to this committee as well as the residents, that when you perform what I'm calling the management consultancy assurance work, there's a different lead person who does the critique of that, to give us some assurance that
Yeah.
there is some
You're not marking
independence.
your own head.
Because otherwise it
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
appear that the sort of vertical lines are the same person doing the same work all the time. And it wasn't clear. I looked at this and I thought, well, where's the role of the officers? There isn't even a role for them. And therefore they should be there at 5.5 under role and
Okay,
responsibility.
take that away. I mean,
So I think that just underlines again the point I'm making, that we are not totally
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
We are not reassured. So and just page 24, develop competencies to address evolving challenges. Again, this is to me more stuff that we haven't necessarily been hearing about, or and therefore I'd be interested to know going forward, what is the plan for that? What sort of training? Are we recruiting people with different skill sets? Are we? Yeah, so just because I'm excited by that side of it, and I want to make sure that we. Any more comments before we? Sydney, you're looking expecting you have a comment.
Just a very quick thing. Top of page 23, leverage technology for enhanced efficiency. Obviously, everybody would 100% agree and back you to do that.
Yeah.
A little bit more clarity in relation to sort of AI, what you're going to do, where it's going to go, just to give us a strategic framework for the type of things that you're thinking of using, what you're saying here, leverage technology. Because obviously you've got a computer, and therefore computer technology. What exactly are you aiming to try and do to give us a bit more clarity and confidence?
So I think as we talk through, we go through the internal audit plan, we can question that.
Continuous improvements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good, thank you for that. A lot of work gone into that, and I read it and was quite excited by it in terms of broadening the work we do. So that's good. So is the committee happy to approve that internal audit strategy for 2025 to 2028?
So
with the changes,
So it's changed, yes, yeah. Are you clear what changes?
Yeah, we'll work out
Yes,
what works.
it's
Good. Then you have to press record.
This is always rubbish.
I'm sure we'll let you know if we haven't seen them.
Recording or something.
Good, great. Can we then move to item number 5, please, the internal audit plan on page 37? Or do you want to take us through this, please?
Thank you. So again, part of the standards expectations are you have an internal audit plan. It needs to take into account assessment of risks, and it accepts that obviously our mandate is slightly different from a private company in the public sector, but there's still an expectation that you will take into account the things that you've been asked to look at, where you know there's changing circumstances and where there are key risks. And it's quite familiar that we've done an audit plan, which has been a bit of a rolling plan over the last few years, since about 2021, I think it was. So what we've got today is basically a summary of where we are at the moment, and as in previous years, this is a rolling plan. At the very beginning, we've talked a little bit about continuous auditing on areas where we think we might be able to do that, which will enable us to cover more areas and maybe look at more data than we would normally be able to do in a standard audit. So that's an area that we're exploring and looking into, and the potential coverage here is really come about from a discussion between myself, the departments, and the we're really doing inputting into these areas, and the departments are very keen for any assistance that we can give to enable them to embed that sort of checking, which can then go on, and then we can focus on the more high priority areas. So on page 46 and 47, what we did here was we identified some areas where we would really like to do some work. So they're quite big picture, with some examples of how we might achieve those areas. The rationale behind those were risk, areas of concern from learn knowledge, And obviously the areas where there's an expectation that we have to do some work. So they're basically broken down into some areas, categories, with some examples there where we would like to do something in each of those areas, but I'm not yet saying what exactly it is. Then on the next two slides, which is 48, 49, there's a typo on page 49. They should have the same heading. They're both audits confirmed for inclusion. So these are pieces of work where we've already had a conversation with departments. There's rationale behind them. We have reviewed our strategic plan, which we'll come to in a minute, which is appendix 2. And we've already earmarked them, a number of them starting Q1 or even slightly later in the year, but we already know that's what we want to do. Then there's the next two slides are areas which we would like to look at for various reasons, but we need to have those conversations yet. We still, we have ongoing meetings with the departments, and obviously things change as well, and this will develop. And when we come to report to you, then we can keep you updated on what's gone into that, what's been added to that, areas that we need to consider, and where we've progressed on those that we've already identified to definitely do. So it has to be fluid, as you know, because things change. If we produce a list of audits at the beginning now, we know by May it's going to be out of date. So this just enables the flexibility, but it also allows you to see the sort of areas that we're looking to look at, and for you to be able to say, well, hang on a minute, you said you wanted to do some work on health and safety. There's not one audit in here on health and safety. I was
wondering that.
What's the plan? So that's the sort of thing that will it's more as much as anything, but it's key things that we think we need to look at because they are areas of concern. And to sort of support all of that, we've also got the strategic plan, which is appendix 2. We had this before. I think it was a 5-year plan, but it was due for update. Lots of changes, and it's not broken down by department because departments can vary, obviously, and then councils restructure and things end up in a different place. So it's almost thematic, I suppose. The type of audit. It's really useful for us because it makes us think about all these different areas that the council operates in, and there are a lot, obviously, and how they link to the council's priorities, what the key persistent risks can be in those areas. And I know something that was mentioned to David at the pre-meeting was, so how do we know when you last did this sort of work? We do map it. We do have everything we do is recorded. So what we said is it would be useful if maybe we shared that with you, not necessarily as a report, but as some briefing, so that you can see the rationale sometimes behind why we're looking at something. It could be, you'll see, oh yeah, it wasn't too good 2 years ago, no wonder they're looking at it again. Or actually, it was really good, nothing much has changed, legislation stayed the same. That makes sense. So we can do that, but we'd send it to you as a sort of brief information.
That piece, I think, links everything together, doing the strategic risks as well.
It's referencing to the risks.
Lots of information, but it's trying to sort of show you how it all
maps together.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm not just getting.
No, I appreciate it's quite hard. It is sometimes quite hard to do that. Yeah.
But we're trying to sort of simplify the reporting, so you've got the big picture, what we'd like to do, we've got what we've already agreed, what we're looking to agree, and things will move from what we're looking to agree list to the agreed list, hopefully.
Yeah.
But some new things will emerge, some things will deprioritize, and we'll update you on those as we go along, so you'll know why we've changed something from the we'd like to do list.
I mean, the big picture thing is really useful for me when I go to the meetings with the various managers, because there's things in there that, oh, what about this? And do you think this is going well? Can you show me this? And it may be that actually it's not too bad, but I just need to have those conversations, and it's long process.
And the other bit we need to do, obviously, as we report through the year, is the other sources of assurance we're relying on. So we talked about things like external inspections when it's Ofsted, CQC, social housing regulator. So how we rely on what they do, but also how we talk to management about areas or gaps that they'd like us to focus on that these inspections didn't. So again, we'll weave a lot more of that into the reporting going forward. So you get that sense of the complete picture of assurance, not just the word.
Yeah.
Internal audit,
Yeah.
all we can rely on as done by others as
Everything,
well.
just map it all out, yes.
Sorry, sorry.
But that all sounds really helpful. I mean, where I'd almost like it colour coded on this, you know,
Mm.
so we didn't have lots of different things that we had to
Yeah.
cross-reference. We could see, oh, this one's been done
Mm.
recently,
Yeah.
or this one's been done by British Standards Institution or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But also sort of, I like the way you're doing it. I think I can see why you do the kind of 3 monthly kind of readjustment, and it's good that it's going to come back. I always feel that we're a little bit passive or a bit after the event. You know, I did sort of, I've got a little kind of tips. I'm thinking that one looks great, but then I don't know how, whether we would feed into that or not, and also we're sort of supposed to be independent, whether we would kind of make some requests or kind of say, well, why you, once we've got the context, why would you not, I don't know, do procurement cards or something? Because we want you to be kind of only kind of influenced by management.
So we definitely want to gather your views.
Yeah.
We take all these different sort of bits of information and sort of.
And do
Source it together.
any of these select committees ask for audits?
I don't think so. That was one of the points I was going to bring up. Again, was about the relationship between scrutiny and audit. Because I know that audit can refer things to scrutiny, and it may be that there's scope. I was looking at some of the items coming up that are also on our work programme.
So we do, sorry.
So it would, if depending on how the timing worked, it would be good if that came to us before.
So I would have thought the individual select committees are nearer to the specific issues within their areas than we are, John.
I've certainly seen this committee prefer going to housing.
Yeah.
But it's never been the other way.
I think one of the things we
Interesting.
I think one of the things we have done the last couple of years, which perhaps needs to be a bit more overt, is we've actually discussed and shared the internal audit plan and the strategic risk register with the screening team to help inform the screening work programme. But I think there's probably more we could do on that, perhaps with the screening chairs as well.
And what is the thing, when you,
yourselves, rather than, so you get to see these things from a screening perspective and then think about how.
That would be really helpful.
when you do an audit on a particular topic, does that report go to the select committee that covers that topic?
No.
Even for reference?
It should do. Perhaps it should. It's the responsible. We obviously report to the executive director, and there'd be. I think I'm sure we would have this conversation where they would have. There's the expectation that they need to inform their relevant member of any issues identified through audit.
Perhaps there's a
That
conversation
would be
with.
the lead member, would it?
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
But perhaps there is a conversation with over screening chairs.
There is that with Mary the other day.
How we thinking around limited assurance. I think that would get
Yes,
a focus on.
Even if you were really concerned about an area in the past, you wouldn't share that with the relevant.
That's it. Come here.
Here.
It should go to lead member through the exec director, but then perhaps that's a gap with it.
The lead member wouldn't necessarily take it to the select committee or they might not. Yes.
And one of the things we've been thinking about in terms of scrutiny following the Grenfell Inquiry report is where are the weak points? Because the committee can only really ask questions based on what it knows, and you can't know what you don't know. So where there are gaps and things that maybe we could say as a blanket kind of rule, where there's limited assurance, let's make it so that will go to scrutiny, and then scrutiny chairs can know that there's nothing that they don't know about. I think, obviously the audit committee is our key point of contact, and I think we need to work with the audit committee on how we get those messages to the right people. And it might be that the audit committee, where there's an issue, will then refer to scrutiny.
You see, you scrutiny, an individual scrutiny committee, maybe itself wanted to look into something, but not necessarily knowing that it's already had an audit that's raised some concerns.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there's that to my committee in terms of both the areas for consideration on 44, and then the next one coming. There are items which are on our work programme already, so it would be good to kind of see how they, timeline-wise, how they match up.
Yes, I think what we could do is look as well at whether we share the reports that come to this committee with the scrutiny members
Yeah.
as well. So the audit updates, maybe, as well as the plan. There's ways in which I think we can work more closely to.
I mean, I think our work is slightly more, are we happy as an audit committee that the audit function is being carried out effectively? I would have thought it more the individual select committees to pick up any concerns about a particular issue within their
Or
area.
about why things are as they are,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
I do recall, I'm pretty sure one of the meetings we talked about, if there was a limited assurance report in a particular area, we want to leave them potentially to come
Yeah.
and talk to us as well. So they would obviously know about it. They would need to talk to your committee.
We haven't done enough of that. Really.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Looking at this plan, it strikes me as a far higher level than the plan we may have seen 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, where the plans were rather more specific to what was going on in this council. So my question to you is, are you're being influenced, aren't you, by being a tri-borough service? And there's a generic sort of template that appeared as I'm listening to you and all of this conversation. You have a template in mind which you're applying in your case across 3 councils, and we're tending to get to this committee something that is higher level, more generic, less specific to our particular council's activities. Am I right in sensing
On the
this?
strategy, yes. So there's that generic strategy. For the audit plan, we might use the same style of reporting, but actually these audits relate specifically to our business in the discussions with.
Well, there's a bit of a
individual
but.
officers.
There's a bit of a but to that, because I can remember your plans being laid the year where you had a list of the audits that you were doing, the resources that you would deploy on them, the priorities that you would give within this council. And when we look at the workload versus the resource available, and we get a grip whether what you're suggesting is within resources for this council. And there seemed to be a closer link to issues that we discuss or we think are areas where you should concentrate on than I can see in this report. So are we going to get any sense of how much resource is applied to internal audit?
So that's the document we talked about. It's a more detailed planning document which we'll share with you. I think just to reassure you, Andrew, this plan is for RBKC. It will be informed by what we see as risks in other councils. That's the benefit of having a shared service.
Yeah, no, I see that's the benefit.
But
There's less bite to
we don't
some of
say,
the things we see.
No. But we don't say we must do this audit in all 3 boroughs because we've got somebody who can do that audit.
Yeah.
We look at the risk for each borough to make sure that with the plan is focused on the risks for this borough and the requirements of this borough. So the way in which we report is similar, but actually the plans for each of the 3 councils will be different, but informed by the risks we see at those other boroughs and outside. So again,
So when do we get, when's the full details of that?
so that's what we talked about earlier. We'll sort out a more detailed document to send around to you as a briefing about how we've constructed the plan.
I mean, the only things that you will see that are similar, obviously, the shared services, because they are provided to those services.
Across 3 boroughs, yes.
Yeah.
But even then, we have to be sure that are there any particular issues related to this council?
Separately.
Something also going through my mind is if we are going to be the best, we have to be doing something more than the other 2 are doing. Or else We're around, John, I think you're next.
The page 48, 46, 47, the areas identified for inclusion in the plan. I actually got a bit overwhelmed as I was turning through the pages because you do have a problem tracking through what actually does make it. Yeah, so I think it would be really helpful, as Tara was already alluding to, is actually either some colour as in yes, we took this forward, or this one's parked, or this one's course fit. It would be really helpful to actually look at those inclusions, because then you see what's dropped off and whether we want to come back to it.
No, I appreciate that.
So obviously this is like we're not quite at the beginning of the year yet. This is where we think we're going to be. once you get into April, you can get the reality. That's really helpful.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. I talked before, page 44, housing management fire doors. And that doesn't appear in the strategy. I noticed that when you look at page 56, housing services and repair and maintenance, there's nothing about fire doors. Obviously, the strategy, as you said to Andrew, is high level. And you also heard that it might be something for housing scrutiny committee, not for here. But I talked about fire doors overview and scrutiny. I thought about fire doors here.
So where it is in here is we're hoping that we might be able to do something through some continuous auditing. So find a way of getting better data and being on top of that as we go along. What housing management, what do they have in place? As far as the detailed plan is, I haven't yet had my latest meeting with housing management, so I don't know quite where that is on their list. There's quite a lot of things on their list. They're always very good at highlighting concerns to us, and they're not afraid to have an audit done. So I would say I don't think it will necessarily slip off anywhere.
Right.
But that was an area where we thought there may be a way of using maybe some technology or some better way of identifying compliance in that area.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking of in that regard, of course, when you've had your meetings with the department, and then you may have a list of issues for either you to look at or on your audit plan. Clearly, fire doors is a big issue.
Yeah,
it's a massive problem.
And
it's almost as if you have to constantly keep saying what's going on with fire doors, what's going on with fire doors, irrespective of what they give you, because that's the sort of the FBI role, as I describe it, where you're constantly probing to get detailed, transparent, accurate information. And when I asked the overview, I think I recall that we've got 6,800 properties. We know that we've done about 3,000 doors or some figure in that regard, and therefore we know we're doing 10 doors a day. So if we've got that data, I'm just giving it to you in sort of 5 seconds, that's probably all that we can expect from an internal audit, because that will just update that data, and that gives us reassurance that somebody's on top of it, they're keeping their feet to the fire, they're constantly asking the question, irrespective of whether they mention it to you and irrespective of whether it's on the plan. So I pick out fire doors as one example of how we would expect to see that sort of almost the FBI role, constantly looking at what they're doing and getting the information, even if they don't volunteer.
How do you differentiate between that already being on the housing register's own risk and actually those figures are constantly being reported? Because that's what they're telling us at the Housing Scrutiny Committee, that they are constantly looking at those figures, and every so often we'll say to them, so what's the latest update? Or they're identifying the tenants consultancy. I mean,
presumably you have to one power BI,
just focus on fire doors when there are other aspects.
Correct.
And it's
Well, this is
whether
where we need
it
to be
is-
clear that who is monitoring, for example,
correct. Yeah.
which
Doesn't fall
committee,
through the
we're being
cracks.
very specific here, which committee is monitoring fire doors? And is that committee happy and content with it? And are we content that if we're not doing it, we're content that they're doing it?
And I think also on fire doors.
The challenge for us is there are 10,000 functions that the council does. How do we separate and keep abreast of it and feel confident?
Well, I just want to point out.
I shut Claire up, sorry.
I was just going to say with fire doors in particular, it's not a simple question of how fast are we doing them, are we doing them enough? Actually, there are a whole sort of host of other factors around the leaseholders. What are we doing about that? What sort of obstacles are there in setting blocks of buildings? What suppliers can we get? How are the suppliers working? How's that contract working out? So there are all those sort of practical questions which would not necessarily be contained in a simple set of data that says we have this many to do, we've done this many, and this is how far we've got to go. It's actually the issues involved are, I think, more on sort of on the ground operationally, are a bit more practical, which means that on that particular one, I think that housing and communities is probably the right place for it. But it's right that this committee should be concerned about it for obvious reasons.
So my point is that, so I like bylaws. That's a good topic. It seems to be really grounded in what we do and what we should be concentrating on. Why on page 48 are we for the first time worrying in this committee about elections?
I know, I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
That's not what we were looking at.
Page 48
Yeah.
elections.
I like that where I thought, I can answer that.
Chief Executive choice.
Yeah.
I can answer that one actually, yeah. So we're hoping to do that audit this year. Timing wise, probably a little bit later in the year. Obviously, there were 2 elections in very short time. There was the GLA election, and about 6 weeks later, I think there was the general election. It was the first time that you had voter ID, GLA elections, and there was a lot of pressure on the teams. There were concerns, I think, that people may not be able to vote because they didn't have the right sort of ID, and there was a lot of monitoring going on that. And we haven't actually looked at elections for quite some time. And the chief exec did say, actually, yeah, I would like it looked at to make sure that it is as good as I think it is.
Yeah.
They've been put to the test this year, twice in quick succession. And it is a front-facing service, let's be honest. It's very, very front-facing.
So what's the front facing?
So it's very close to the electorate residents, so that and it's an area where things could, if they go wrong, it makes or breaks someone literally. And I was hoping to do it in Q4 once they've recovered from the elections, but unfortunately they're all taking their leave now because they couldn't take it in the summer because of the elections. So we booked it to start in April. That's why it's in.
Well, my point is we can sort of have scope drift. That's
Yes.
all.
Yeah.
And it's the question of what is things that are most.
It's always
concerned.
choices, isn't it?
Yes.
It is, but I would say as a councillor, that is increasingly election getting more complicated, and you've just heard voter IDs are classic. And when you're at the polling stations, you do come across a lot of angry residents who don't have the right ID. It causes the office. So I think elections are becoming more complicated, and then we put on top of that cyber security and all the threat from it. So actually, I do think it's an interesting topic to look at.
Postal voting as well, yeah.
Postal voting, and this year, for example, anybody who's got a postal vote already has got to re-register. It comes off. So there's quite a.
And it's managing also within a budget. There's quite strict rules on it, and also something that's come across from other authorities, not just in London, is actually resourcing the elections. It's getting harder and harder to get people to help resource the election.
And while you can do a lot of background stuff, when the election is suddenly, as it was in the general this year, you suddenly have to
Yeah.
Yeah.
So technically, we have an election 26, 28 and another one by 2030. So it's 2 years, every 2 years at the moment. So this is the fallow year, so to speak.
It's about the right time to do it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so thanks, Chair. Just one final question. On page 48, children services schools, the bit that says if resources allowed. Now, obviously, there's no context here, and we do have a children's committee looking at that. But for example, I wasn't sure whether that was something to do with safeguarding, keeping children safe that might want to be audited. And if it was something of that sort of priority nature, should it be prioritised earlier on in the year? Because it wasn't clear what was going to be going on in schools where it says if resources allowed specifically. So it didn't give me enough context. I was a little bit concerned if it was a safeguarding issue.
No,
we should be doing
no,
that
it's not.
immediately.
We have a 5-year programme, so we would audit every school within 5 years, more frequently if required. When we come to produce the plan, we identify which schools are due for review. Things happen during the year, mergers, there's been a academisation, lots of things change. We go through that with the school's finance team, and they will then highlight those that are causing concern and those that aren't. If they're not causing concern, we've got a lot of schools to do this year. They will say it's not a problem if you can't get them done this year. We'd be happy you can do them beginning of next year. But we really would like you to do these other ones. So we have that conversation to prioritise them. If their opinion was poor last time, if they changed structure, that is more likely that we will
we will definitely include them. There's nothing to do with safeguarding at all.
Okay,
Finance.
good discussion there, some issues to bring forward. So that was an information, for information, so are we happy that we've discussed it and, interesting stuff. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So that, let's move on to item number 7, action tracker and forward programme. There we go.
A small number of items are the action tracker from last time, all of which are going to be progressed, some of which will be in the 25/6 committee work programme. That's set out in table 1. Make any comments? I think this group, the cybersecurity briefing can be rearranged again in May, so the problem.
Okay.
That's an issue for the director, and the last one was meant to be held.
Chairman, I've just got one question. Are we having accounts once in this committee?
So we talked at the workshop, didn't we, about?
I wasn't at it, so.
Yeah, sorry, apologies, so I've got a note here afterwards, but so we talked about at the sort of workshop of not having the draft accounts being presented to the committee, but circulated to the committee for information,
Right,
and then have the final accounts come.
okay, so that was a change from that, and that,
Yes,
because it's always seemed awkward.
yeah, so that was a conversation we had at the workshop, very much so as about making sure you've got sight of them, but that you weren't.
Right, so that's about how you set it draft out rather than have one from.
Yes, that's right.
And clearly what I was conscious of, we don't lessen our audit or looking at them, but we often get them and there's generally not a lot to comment on.
Well, the thing we would show.
But if anything comes out of it.
From the audit, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
So we would really want to chew on any issues that come out
Yes.
of the audit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But obviously, if you see it and there are any issues that you want to bring to the committee, then we can do that.
Okay.
Any other comment? Yeah.
Yeah, just thank you, Dave. Just a quick question on the forward plan. Has anything been removed? Give us extra space to discuss things in a bit more detail.
So we have reduced the number of items you'll hopefully see, apart from the one meeting each year, which is the June one. So what we're looking at doing from our perspective is to put together an assurance report. So rather than having separate broad audits, health and safety, procurement, and other bits and pieces, coming at different times, putting together a combined assurance report for you, which we're going to put together a template during the spring, early summer, share with you first, see if that does what you want it to do in terms of future reporting, how we do it, and then we'll use that and come back with that in the September meeting is the plan. The October meeting, sorry, is the plan. So that's one way in which we look to reduce the number of reports, but also how we bring all that assurance together to help you as a committee to identify the kind of key issues you want to tease out. We've also provided lots more space for focus risk items with relevant exec directors. So again, it's an opportunity for you when you see the risk ratings to say, next time we'd like to have X exec director and lead member come to us to talk in more detail about their risk.
Are we going to see, will all committee members see the individual reports just for reference, or
Yes.
are we?
Well, we can think about whether you want more detail in the background as well, but we'll look to consolidate it into one report.
And I think this came out of the bit that we so often get reports just for information. There's not a lot we can do to it. And yet we tend, even though it's for information, we tend to have a good discussion about it, but to what end?
Yeah.
Is it useful for the officers to hear our discussion? I mean, I don't see that it's necessarily entirely without value.
Was it, but the the reports are pretty well.
They may be, but sometimes actions come out of them that maybe there's a gap, there's a report that we would like, or identifying something that we would like to know more about or pick up on.
And I think that's what we need to try and think about in terms of the way we report to help you to do that.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. It's about actually having, seeing the officers, what's their eyes and having a conversation, and then how do you draw from that further things you want to happen. Yeah.
It's that balance, isn't it? We have quite often commented on all the reports for information. That we don't necessarily feel it's a good use of this committee's time. Yet we need to have some mechanism for what you just said, Claire.
So
So,
a pathway.
yeah,
I think there would be other things we'd send to you as briefings for information that if you then wanted to draw,
Yeah.
bring to the committee, that we do that. So you wouldn't miss out, as it were, in some things that we've won before, but you'd have the opportunity to think about whether there's a committee.
just you're giving us more homework.
If you would like, well, an opportunity if you wish that, but try and focus and reduce the agendas, because I think that's something we've heard loud and clear.
And it's not just about focusing individually, it is about focusing and giving us more time to actually spend on. Okay, any other comments on the forward plan?
Just the final one was on the focused risk items. What is the process for us getting that executive director? Will it be someone who we identify in the June meeting that we want to see in July meeting? Or do you have a sort of a pro form of people that you would recommend that we can speak to that we haven't spoken to for years or that we need to speak to? So for example, say Oracle, for example, the Oracle chap is here to give them some great questions.
So I think it's a combination of things we can do. So one will be the corporate risk register, another will be our reporting, but the other bit will be your views as a committee as to what you'd like. If you don't think it's been suggested, actually, what would you like to see here and who you'd like to see here? So I think it's a combination of all those three things.
And I think the Oracle particularly is one that we've asked, we need.
Yeah, that's it.
Any other issues on the programme?
Just to add that the meetings from July onwards have not been confirmed. They won't get confirmed until we open for
Dates.
Okay.
You're expecting those, you can pencil them in.
yes, pencil them in, but not in there.
You did.
Yeah.
Happy with it the other way.
It went the other way, yes.
I think agree with me. Yes.
Okay, any other questions, any other points on that? Sorry. In which case then?
One point is a sort of AOB point, which is one we mentioned earlier about the register of interest. I think you're going to go and look at updating that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But instruction.
This is an update.
Oh, okay, thank you.
See if you have somebody you want to talk to.
Yeah, that's okay. Brilliant. Chair, once the meeting's finished. Yeah.
Okay, so that concludes the formal part of this meeting today. The next meeting of the Audit and Transparency Committee is scheduled to take place at 6:30 on Monday, the 23rd of June. Thank you for everybody for your time and here ends the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't rush, Andrew.
No, I agree with the large.
We'll take them, pass it on.